Welcome to True Echo, where powerful stories of resilience, justice, and redemption are told in a way that stays with you long after the final word. Here, we bring you real and inspired by real-life moments where ordinary people face extraordinary challenges, and rise above them. Today's story is one of prejudice turned inside out, when a neighbor tried to shut down a black wedding, only to find out the groom was the mayor. The late afternoon sun draped Maple Ridge Drive in warm, honeyed light, but the tension in the air was anything but pleasant. Zara adjusted the delicate lace of her ivory gown, her eyes darting toward her groom, Devon Williams, who stood tall and dignified despite the hostility radiating from across the street. 8-year-old Amara, the flower girl, clutched her bouquet tightly until Margaret Whitmore, perfectly coiffed, draped in designer linen, snatched it from her hands and hurled it into the gutter. "Get this ghetto trash off my street before I call immigration on every last one of you," Margaret spat, her voice a shrill whip of venom. The glob of spit that followed landed squarely on Devon's polished dress shoes. Gasps rippled through the crowd of 60 wedding guests, the kind of gasp that signaled disbelief laced with a simmering fury. Zara's hand tightened around her dress as though holding herself back from lunging forward. The wedding was meant to be a dream, an elegant outdoor ceremony celebrating not just love, but community. Willowbrook was supposed to be an inclusive place, or at least Devon had worked tirelessly to make it one during his years on the city council and later, as its mayor. But now, with champagne glasses shattered on the pavement from Margaret's deliberate kick and the crisp linens of the reception table billowing like flags in a storm, that dream teetered on the edge of collapse. "Not while I'm breathing," Margaret declared, pointing a manicured finger at Devon's family. Her voice dripped with the kind of superiority that assumed everyone would rally behind her, because, after all, she believed she was Willowbrook. Devon's expression barely changed. If anything, his stillness was more commanding than a raised voice could ever be. His fingers brushed his platinum cufflinks, catching the sunlight just enough to reveal a small city seal. But before anyone could ask, Margaret was already thumbing furiously at her phone, dialing 911. "Yes, police," she said, voice high and urgent. "There's a massive illegal gathering. Loud music, public intoxication, probably drugs. You need to come to 847 Maple Ridge right now. It's a bunch of urban people who don't belong here." The silence that followed her words wasn't because no one had heard, it was because everyone had. Phones began to lift, recording. A couple of teenagers started live streams, captions flashing, "Karen meltdown at my aunt's wedding." Within minutes, dozens of people online were watching the confrontation unfold in real time. The shrill sound of Margaret's wedge heels clicked on the driveway as she pivoted between her phone and the small crowd of neighbors who had started to emerge. "They're destroying our community standards," she announced to anyone who would listen, or at least to the handful she thought would agree. But what Margaret didn't know, what none of her dwindling supporters knew, was that Devon was already thinking 10 moves ahead. He knew the law. He knew the ordinances. And he knew that when the police arrived, the conversation would turn in a way that would leave Margaret grasping at air. From the dessert table, Zara's teenage niece Destiny filmed silently, her phone angled to catch both Margaret's contorted face and the elegant setup behind her. Already, comments were pouring in: "She's losing it, hope they sue, someone tell her who the groom is." And Devon? He was just getting started. Margaret's voice sharpened as she kept the dispatcher on the line, pacing her driveway like a general on a battlefield. "Yes, ma'am, I'm telling you, they're blocking driveways, blasting music, drinking in public. This isn't a wedding, it's a street party in the middle of my neighborhood." On the other end, the dispatcher's tone stayed maddeningly calm. "Ma'am, we'll send officers to investigate. Please remain where you are." Margaret hung up and immediately switched over to the Willowbrook neighborhood app, typing so furiously her long acrylic nails clacked against the screen. "Emergency at Maple Ridge, protect our community from these people." She hit "Go Live," giving her 47 followers a shaky, close-up shot of her face as she ranted about outsiders ruining her street. Meanwhile, across the lawn, Zara's father tried to usher the younger children away from the spectacle. Little Marcus tugged Devon's jacket sleeve, his eyes wide. "Uncle D, why is that lady so mad at us?" Devon knelt so they were eye to eye. "Sometimes," he said gently, "people get confused about what makes a community strong. They think it's about keeping people out. But really, it's about bringing people together." The words reached Margaret's ears, and her response was instant and explosive. "Don't you dare brainwash that child with your victim narrative. This is about property values and community standards." Phones from every angle caught the outburst. A live viewer on Destiny's Instagram typed, "She's done. This is going viral." Within minutes, the faint wail of sirens floated in from the distance. Margaret's eyes lit with self-satisfaction. "Hear that? 12 minutes and this illegal assembly is over." She smirked toward Devon like she'd already won. Devon's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "We'll see." When the police cruisers finally rounded the corner, the energy shifted. Two officers, Martinez and Rodriguez, stepped out, scanning the scene. They didn't see a drunken mob or overturned trash cans. They saw rows of white chairs, satin ribbons fluttering in the breeze, and a string quartet softly tuning their instruments. "Officers, thank God you're here," Margaret gushed, rushing forward like a damsel in distress. "These people have been terrorizing our neighborhood for hours: noise, blocked driveways, total disregard for our rules." She shoved her phone toward Officer Martinez, showing the live feed to her modest online audience, which had now swelled to 300 viewers. Rodriguez's gaze moved past her to the reception area. "Ma'am, this appears to be a wedding," he said evenly. "What's the specific disturbance?" "Disturbance?" Margaret gestured wildly toward the guests, her voice dripping with indignation. "Look at this invasion. Loud music, illegal parking, public intoxication. And you," she spun back to Devon, "you're not fooling anyone with your little permit papers." Devon stayed calm, pulling a thick folder from his tuxedo jacket. "Officers, here are the official permits for today's event, approved by the city months ago." Margaret snatched them, skimming the pages. "These could be fake. I'll bet your cousin at City Hall whipped these up for you." Ring doorbells from houses up and down the street caught the exchange in crystal clarity, storing the footage directly to cloud servers. Across the street, two teenage boys had started a TikTok live stream, their commentary equal parts stunned and amused. "She's actually calling the cops on a wedding," one said, shaking his head. Rodriguez's radio crackled. He stepped away, murmuring into his shoulder mic, but his eyes flicked toward Devon in a way that hinted at recognition. When he returned, he and Martinez exchanged a quick look. "Ma'am," Martinez said to Margaret, "before we take any action, we'll need to verify the permits and check noise levels." "My word should be enough," she shot back, her voice climbing an octave. Several neighbors who had drifted over began shifting uncomfortably. Even a few of her earlier supporters looked like they wanted to sink into the pavement. Margaret, however, was too caught up in her performance to notice the ground shifting beneath her feet. She was certain the arrival of law enforcement meant victory. What she didn't know, what was about to detonate in the next few minutes, was that the man she was trying to evict from his own wedding wasn't just any groom. He was the one person in Willowbrook with the power to turn this entire situation inside out. And Devon was about to play his hand. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across Maple Ridge Drive as the scene tightened like a drum. Devon stood motionless, his eyes locked on Martinez and Rodriguez. The two officers had moved to opposite corners of the yard, scanning the setup, tables, chairs, catering staff moving with precision, a soft string melody drifting in the air. Nothing about it screamed disturbance. But Margaret, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and self-righteousness, was still riding high. She planted herself squarely in front of the wedding arch, arms crossed like a human barricade. "You're not proceeding with anything until we get this whole mess sorted," she declared, her voice loud enough for the live stream viewers, now topping 1,200, to hear every word. "Ma'am," Martinez warned, his tone shifting toward command, "you need to step aside. You're interfering with a lawful gathering." "I'm protecting my community," she shot back. Then, with deliberate emphasis, "we have to take a stand against this invasion." The word hung in the air like poison. Even the background chatter went silent for a moment. Phones tilted upward as guests and onlookers captured the statement from multiple angles. In seconds, it was clipped, captioned, and uploaded to TikTok and Instagram with hashtags like #WillowbrookKaren and #MayorWedding, though Margaret had no idea the latter was about to make sense. Devon stepped forward slowly, unhurried, his movements precise. He slipped off his tuxedo jacket, folding it neatly over one arm. The gesture was smooth, practiced, commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. On the collar of his custom white dress shirt, the subtle metallic glint of the Willowbrook City seal caught the fading sunlight. Margaret frowned, momentarily thrown off by the detail. "What is that supposed to be?" she asked, her voice sharp but less certain. From his inside pocket, Devon drew a slim leather wallet and flipped it open. He held it out to Officer Rodriguez, who took it, glanced once, and straightened like he'd been snapped to attention. "Good afternoon, Your Honor," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the crowd. The words sliced through the air. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Someone near the back actually dropped their phone. And on Margaret's live stream, the comments exploded in a frenzy of disbelief and glee. "Wait. Your Honor. Is this dude the mayor?" Karen called the cops on the mayor. "She's finished." Margaret blinked, her jaw tightening. What? What did you just call him?" Martinez took a step forward, matching his partner's tone. "Your Honor. Mayor Devon Williams." If there had been any breeze left on the street, it was gone now. The moment felt suspended, like even the air itself was waiting to see what Margaret would do next. Devon's expression was calm, almost disarmingly so. "We've actually met before, Ms. Whitmore," he said evenly. "Twice, in fact, at city council meetings where you voiced concerns about noise ordinances and landscaping contracts." Margaret's lips parted, but no sound came out. The realization hit in waves, this wasn't some outsider crashing her street. This was the man who lived 2 doors down, the one who had helped her with groceries after her hip surgery, the one whose name had been printed in the donor list for her church fundraiser. Across the street, the teenage TikTok streamers were losing their minds, alternating between shouting updates and laughing so hard the camera shook. Destiny's Instagram live viewer count shot past 3,000 in under a minute. Channel 7 News, which had been filming the chaos for the evening broadcast, was now capturing something much bigger, the moment a woman's prejudice collided headfirst with reality. Devon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Officers," he said, still holding that calm tone, "there's no need for an apology. You were responding to a citizen's concern. But now that everything is clear, I'd like to proceed with my wedding." Margaret's face had gone pale, her grip on her phone loosening as the weight of what she'd just done began to settle in. But this was only the beginning. Devon wasn't about to let the moment pass without addressing the damage, not just to his wedding day, but to the values of the community he had sworn to serve. And the way he was about to do it, would ensure Margaret never forgot this day for as long as she lived. Devon took one slow step toward the cluster of media cameras, the kind of step that told everyone this wasn't just a groom reclaiming his wedding, it was a leader taking command of a crisis. He didn't have to raise his voice, his authority filled the space without volume. "Since we have the community gathered here," he began, his gaze sweeping from the officers to the neighbors to the live-streaming teens, "perhaps we should discuss what community actually means." Margaret's head snapped toward him, but she didn't interrupt, not yet. The energy on Maple Ridge had shifted completely. Only minutes ago, she'd been the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. Now, with the cameras locked on her, she looked cornered. Devon turned toward the officers. "First, let's address the noise complaint. Officer Martinez, you're reading." Martinez lifted the official sound meter. "Current level, 64 decibels. Residential weekend limit is 75 until 10 p.m. Well within the ordinance." Devon nodded. "And permits?" Rodriguez held up the folder Devon had given them earlier. "Filed March 15, approved April 2, posted for public comment 30 days. Fees paid in full. Insurance coverage verified." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers, including the neighbors who had crept closer to see what was happening. Someone whispered, "He's got every box checked." Devon's voice remained even, but there was an edge of steel under it now. "Ms. Whitmore, as a long-standing city contractor, you're familiar with our vendor conduct standards, yes?" Margaret's throat bobbed. "Why yes. Your Honor." He tapped his tablet, pulling up the municipal code with a practiced flick of his fingers. City Charter Section 12.3.7, vendors engaging in discriminatory behavior, harassment, or actions contrary to Willowbrook's stated values of inclusivity may face contract review, suspension, or termination. You signed your agreement to this clause in 2022, when your company renewed its contract for Memorial Park. Margaret's eyes widened slightly. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered, though the live streams capturing every second left no room for her to reframe the narrative. Devon's tone sharpened, just enough to pierce. "What it looks like, Ms. Whitmore, is that you publicly targeted a lawful, permitted community event based on the race of its participants, your own neighbors, your mayor, and his family. That behavior is incompatible with your obligations as a municipal vendor." The guests and neighbors weren't just watching anymore, they were listening. Phones remained raised, but now the energy was less chaotic, more like an audience in a courtroom, waiting for the verdict. Margaret's live stream comments were brutal. "She's cooked. Goodbye contracts. The mayor's roasting her politely and it's worse than yelling." Her follower count, which had grown during the confrontation, began to dwindle as people tuned in elsewhere, to Destiny's feed, to the TikTok streams, to the local news broadcast cutting in live. Across the street, Mrs. Sinclair, the elderly neighbor who had been quietly filming from her porch, muttered just loud enough for her own phone mic to catch it, "She brought this on herself." Devon scrolled to another section on his tablet. "Your company, Whitmore Landscaping, holds city contracts totaling $2.3 million annually. You maintain our parks, city hall grounds, athletic fields, and holiday decorations. You have done quality work." His eyes locked on hers. "But quality work cannot offset the damage caused when a vendor undermines the community it serves." That line landed like a hammer. Margaret's knees looked unsteady, but she clung to her composure, or the illusion of it. Devon turned to the cameras deliberately. "To be clear, this is not about revenge. This is about accountability. On Tuesday morning, the City Council will hold a public hearing to review Whitmore Landscaping's status as a vendor. The hearing will be live-streamed for transparency. Ms. Whitmore will have the opportunity to present her defense. The community will have the opportunity to testify." Gasps spread through the crowd. Even Margaret's staunchest allies knew that a public hearing was political and social exposure on a scale she could not control. Her phone buzzed again and again, her business partner, her employees, maybe even her lawyer. She ignored it, eyes fixed on Devon like she could will him to stop. But he wasn't done. He closed his tablet, his expression softening only slightly as he looked at the guests. "Now, with the matter addressed, I'd like to get back to the purpose of today, a wedding, not a confrontation. My wife has been extraordinarily patient, and I will not allow her day to be defined by prejudice." Zara stepped forward, the crowd parting for her. Her hand slipped into Devon's, and for the first time since the chaos began, her smile returned, not wide, but steady. "Let's have our wedding," she said, her voice clear enough to carry. And just like that, Devon had turned the most humiliating public ambush into a masterclass in composure and authority. But for Margaret, the real fallout had only begun, because every single second of this was already spreading across the internet like wildfire. The string quartet eased into a soft, graceful melody as the guests settled back into their seats, but the undercurrent of energy in the air was different now. Every camera, every phone, every lens remained aimed at the ceremony. Not because of the vows that were about to be exchanged, but because the whole country, or so it felt, was watching the moment unfold in real time. Destiny's Instagram Live ticked past 4,000 viewers. The TikTok streams from across the street had already crossed the 15,000 mark. Local news had switched to continuous coverage, with Chiran's reading, Mayor's wedding interrupted by neighbor, city contracts under review. Margaret stood in her driveway, clutching her phone like a life raft, but the tide was pulling her under. Notifications poured in relentlessly, angry comments on her business page, one-star reviews citing racist conduct, direct messages from longtime clients telling her they'd be terminating contracts. The speed of the backlash was dizzying, almost surreal, like watching a dam burst in slow motion. And still, Devon didn't so much as glance in her direction. He led Zara to the front, their hands interlaced, his posture calm and composed. Captain Washington, still in his dress blues, stepped into place as best man, his presence anchoring the atmosphere with quiet strength. The Reverend cleared his throat, his voice rich with both authority and warmth. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to celebrate love, love that perseveres through adversity, love that stands tall in the face of injustice, love that today reminds us that dignity will always outshine hate. It wasn't part of the original script, but the guests knew exactly who those words were for. Even Margaret, fuming in her corner, couldn't mistake the pointed truth in them. As Devon and Zara exchanged vows, applause rippled through the crowd. Not the polite kind, but the full, resounding kind that bursts from people who know they've just witnessed something bigger than a wedding. It was a statement, one that echoed far beyond Maple Ridge Drive. Meanwhile, online, the story was mutating into something much larger. Twitter threads broke down the events in real time, with screenshots, timestamps, and side-by-side clips from different angles. TikTok stitched the footage with captions like, "She called the cops on the mayor, at his own wedding." The phrase, "mayor wedding," started trending nationally, climbing into the top 5 hashtags by the end of the evening. On Margaret's end, the blow was immediate and severe. Whitmore Landscaping's Google rating plummeted from 4.8 to 1.2 in hours. Yelp placed a temporary freeze on reviews due to the unusual activity, but screenshots of the new flood of negative feedback spread on social media anyway. Her Facebook business page was inundated with comments demanding apologies, refunds, and contract cancellations. She tried to go live again to explain herself, but her Wi-Fi buckled under the surge of traffic. Switching to cellular didn't help, the comments drowned her out faster than she could speak. Every time she said, "misunderstanding," viewers would reply with clips of her calling the gathering an invasion and ghetto trash. When the Reverend pronounced Devon and Zara husband and wife, cheers erupted, cheers that traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. The officers stayed respectfully at the perimeter, watching as the couple sealed their vows with a kiss, the media recording every moment. Devon turned to the crowd. "Friends, family, neighbors, you're all welcome to join us for the reception. Let's make this a celebration of unity." That invitation landed like a challenge in disguise. Even those who had been on the fence earlier felt the weight of what had just happened. A few neighbors who had initially sided with Margaret quietly drifted toward the reception tables, accepting champagne flutes from the catering staff. And yet, Margaret stayed rooted in her driveway, pale and tight-lipped. The day had slipped entirely from her control, but the worst was still ahead, because Devon's announcement about the public hearing was already setting the stage for her reckoning. By the time the last champagne glass was set down and the string quartet packed away their instruments, Maple Ridge Drive was quiet again. But in the digital world, it was anything but calm. News clips of the confrontation dominated evening broadcasts. Channel 7 ran a split screen, on one side, Margaret's red-faced tirade, on the other, Devon calmly revealing his mayoral ID. Channel 12's anchor opened with, "A neighborhood wedding turns into a viral lesson on prejudice, accountability, and composure." Even national networks were picking it up as a human interest meets social justice story. Margaret had stopped looking at her phone entirely. Every time she refreshed, there was something worse: another lost client, another furious voicemail, another news headline linking her name to racist neighbor. Even Whitmore landscaping suppliers were calling, quietly hinting that they might reconsider partnerships if the PR nightmare didn't cool down soon. She knew the hearing was only 2 days away. And that terrified her more than anything. Tuesday morning arrived fast. The Willowbrook City Council chambers were packed wall to wall, with reporters, residents, and city employees elbowing for space. The air was heavy with the quiet hum of anticipation, the kind that comes before a verdict in a trial everyone already thinks they know the outcome of. Margaret entered with her attorney, clutching a prepared statement in hands that trembled slightly. Her once polished confidence had been replaced with a rigid mask, but the exhaustion was clear: dark circles under her eyes, posture a little less upright than usual. Devon was already there, seated beside Deputy Mayor Catherine Jenkins. He had recused himself from leading the review to avoid any claims of bias, but his presence alone filled the room with weight. Jenkins, poised and precise, called the hearing to order. For the next 4 hours, the chamber became a public forum for accountability. 23 residents testified, some about the incident, others about broader experiences with discrimination in Willowbrook. Mrs. Sinclair spoke first, her voice slow but steady. "I saw a joyful day for my neighbors ruined by ugly words. But I also saw Margaret carry groceries for me last winter. People can change, if they want to." Several others weren't as forgiving. One young mother recounted how her biracial children had been the subject of whispers at HOA meetings. Another resident, a former employee of Whitmore Landscaping, described quitting after overhearing Margaret use slurs on a job site. Margaret's turn came at last. She stood, unfolding her statement like it might shield her. "Your Honor, members of the council. I displayed unconscious bias and catastrophically poor judgment. My words were inexcusable and do not represent my true values or my company's commitment to serving all Willowbrook residents." Her voice faltered in places, but she got through it. She sat down, visibly relieved to be done. But everyone knew the harder part was next: the council's decision. Deputy Mayor Jenkins' verdict struck a careful balance. Whitmore Landscaping will remain on probationary contractor status for 18 months. Ms. Whitmore will personally complete 40 hours of cultural competency training, submit quarterly diversity reports, and perform 100 hours of community service at the Willowbrook Community Center. Murmurs rippled through the room. It wasn't a total termination of her business, but it was a public mark on her record, one that would follow her into every future bid for city contracts. "This isn't about punishment," Jenkins added, her voice firm. "It's about rehabilitation and ensuring our vendors reflect our community values." Devon said nothing during the announcement, but as the council adjourned, he looked directly at Margaret. His expression was calm, almost sympathetic, but unyielding. She gave a small nod, perhaps the first acknowledgement that she understood this was no longer just about her. Within a month, the changes Devon had been pushing for quietly took root. The Willowbrook Welcome Initiative launched, introducing new protocols for handling discrimination complaints, tighter identity verification for neighborhood apps, and quarterly Good Neighbor awards to encourage inclusivity. Margaret's community service forced her into daily contact with the same kinds of families she had once viewed with suspicion. At first, she kept her distance. But over time, slowly, something shifted. Conversations with residents at the community center chipped away at her preconceptions. The competency training made her uncomfortable, but it also made her think. By the end of 6 months, she'd hired 3 new employees from underrepresented backgrounds, not because the city was watching, but because she'd come to value the work they did. Still, she knew her redemption would never erase that afternoon on Maple Ridge. And maybe that was the point. 3 years later, the air on Maple Ridge Drive felt different, lighter somehow, though the memory of that infamous afternoon still lingered in the minds of those who had witnessed it. The street was lined with flowering dogwoods planted during a neighborhood beautification project. Ironically, the landscaping contract had been fulfilled by Whitmore Landscaping. Devon stood on the very spot where Margaret had thrown the bouquet into the gutter, only now, he held a framed proclamation from the National Municipal League declaring Willowbrook America's model inclusive community. Cameras flashed as he spoke to a crowd that stretched from the front lawns to the end of the block. "This recognition isn't about me," Devon said, his voice strong but warm. "It's about a community that chose growth over grudges, solutions over shouting. We faced an ugly moment, and we didn't bury it, we used it to build something better." Beside the stage, Zara beamed, their anniversary ribbon pinned to her dress. The Unity Day celebration, an event born from the ashes of that disrupted wedding, had become an annual tradition, drawing hundreds to Memorial Park for food, music, and cultural exchange. And then, to the surprise of many, it was Margaret's turn at the microphone. She walked with the quiet confidence of someone who had been humbled but not broken. Her voice was steady, carrying over the crowd of nearly 800 residents. 3 years ago, I stood in this same neighborhood as the worst version of myself, she said plainly. I saw neighbors as threats instead of partners. I mistook differences for danger. And I let my fear speak louder than my humanity. She paused, letting the weight of the admission sink in. Today, I know that real community means everyone belongs. The second chance I was given wasn't deserved, it was earned, hour by hour, through learning and listening. I'm grateful for it every day. Applause swelled, not the thunderous cheer Devon received, but a genuine, respectful acknowledgement. The redemption wasn't total, and some wounds would never fully heal, but her consistency over the past 3 years had convinced even her harshest critics that change, however slow, was possible. Whitmore Landscaping had not only survived, it had evolved. The company had become a regional leader in inclusive hiring, winning Diversity Excellence Awards and contracts in 5 municipalities. Margaret no longer saw her municipal work as a symbol of status, but as a responsibility. She kept a printed copy of the city's vendor conduct clause framed above her desk as a daily reminder. Devon's leadership reputation had grown beyond Willowbrook. The Harvard Kennedy School had published a case study titled Crisis Leadership in Local Government, the Williams Wedding Response. 23 cities across the country had adopted variations of Willowbrook's Welcome Initiative, citing its mix of accountability and rehabilitation as a model. Zara's nonprofit had expanded into 12 neighboring cities, focusing on youth leadership and cultural exchange programs. Together, the couple had become a quiet force in shaping inclusive policy at the municipal level nationwide. When Devon closed the Unity Day ceremony, he left the crowd with a final reflection. Change doesn't happen overnight. It happens when we choose to meet conflict with conversation, when we turn moments of division into opportunities for understanding. The most powerful response to hate isn't anger, it's organized, systematic change that protects those who come after us. And as the crowd dispersed into the park, neighbors who had once crossed the street to avoid one another now stood shoulder to shoulder at food stalls, laughing over shared plates. The viral wedding story had started as a public humiliation, but it had ended as living proof that even the ugliest moments could plant seeds of transformation, if a community was willing to tend to them. This story reminds us that the loudest voices aren't always the strongest, and that true strength lies in staying calm, standing firm, and letting the truth do the talking. As Mayor Devon Williams proved, dignity and composure can dismantle prejudice more effectively than rage ever could. In his words, the most powerful response to hate isn't anger, it's organized, systematic change that protects those who come after us. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see how quiet strength can turn a community around. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done in Devon's position? How can we build more inclusive neighborhoods where you live? Subscribe to True Echo for more stories of courage, justice, and transformation, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a moment that matters.